Alright, welcome everybody. We're going to be talking about angles, which is really nice because we're going to be taking a little bit of a break from the trigonometry and just talk about angles. And you've seen angles before and you've worked with angles. Pretty much everybody knows what they are, so I won't go into too much explanation. But here we're going to deal with angles in standard position. Now, what is standard position? And this is very important that you know what this is. Standard position has two sides to an angle. The first side, being the initial side, is always going to be pointing to the right. If you notice this diagram right over here, this initial side is going to be pointing to the right. It's not going to be pointing up, not to the left, not down. It's going to be pointing to the right. Now, the terminal side is wherever the line ends. It's the second part of this angle. Terminal meaning ending. A nice way to remember this is when we used to take planes to places, the place that we would end up where we get all of our luggage at the end is called a terminal. You can also think of the terminator that ends people. Therefore, the terminal side is the side that ends the angle. Now, another important thing is that you're going to see this red line that comes off of the first line and ends at the terminal side. Why is that so important? Well, the reason why it's so important is because of this next little box here. We're actually able to have two different types of angles. We can have a positive angle and we can also have a negative angle. And what is the difference between these two? Well, if you notice the first picture here, the positive angle has a line coming up out of the initial side. Now, when it comes up out of the initial side, that angle will be positive. Now, on the other hand, if you look at this picture right here, if it comes down off of that initial side, it's going to be a negative angle. Now, each of these lines could have multiple different actual angles. For instance, this first one, if I had a line that comes down off this line and comes around here, that would be a negative version of this positive angle. So these lines could have multiple angles associated with them, so that's why you have to have that red arcing line that connects those two sides. That way you know exactly what type of angle you're actually dealing with. Now, we're going to discuss some examples, but before we do, I want to just explain to you what exactly is a degree, because that's usually how we hear about angles, some kind of degree motion. The way it first developed is a long time ago. Some early mathematicians decided that we're going to have a circle and we're going to split up this circle into 360 different parts. What does that look like? Well, just imagine a pizza. Usually it's sliced into 8 different pieces, but now imagine that instead of 8 different slices, you had 360 slices. You would barely even be able to see each slice. And that's exactly what happened here. Each of those little slices is a degree, and there are 360 of them around a circle. Now let's think about this for a second. If we go all the way around a circle, we're going to get 360 degrees. That makes sense. We just talked about that. But what happens if we only go halfway around a circle? What is that going to be? Well, it's just going to be half of 360, which is going to be 180. Now, what is a quarter? That would just be half of 180, so that would be 90 degrees. Now, usually this part doesn't come up right now, but what is half of 90? What happens if I had a line that was right here? What would that be called? Well, what is half of 90? That's going to be 45 degrees. So how would I get the next thing over? I'm going to draw a line right over here. What would that one be? Well, that's just going to be 90 plus another 45. And that makes sense. Each of these are 45. So if I have 90 here and I add a 45, that would be whatever this angle is right over here. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So that will be 135. Now I have 180 here. I'm going to add another line. And what is that one going to be? Again, it's just going to be 80 plus another 45 degrees. So that is going to be 225. That will be that angle there. Now, what would be the next one? Again, we're just going to add another 45 degrees, and that will be 270 degrees. And last but not least, we have this line right over there, and that is going to be 315 degrees. Now, how does this help us sectioning off this circle in these ways? Now, again, I said that there's going to be 360 little pie slices around them, but a lot of times these are probably the most important ones when we're actually going to be drawing out these angles. Now, first of all, when I'm drawing out an angle, let me just finish it off here, just to make it look a little bit better. Now, when we draw this angle in standard position, we're always going to have a line starting from the middle and going out to the right. That's going to be our initial side. Now, where does the terminal side go? Well, we're dealing with 215 degrees. Where would that go? Well, I know that this is 180. I know that this is 270. I know this is 225, and it's going to be somewhere in between those two because it's more than 180 and less than 225, so I know that the terminal side is going to be right over there. Now, there is one more thing. We have to put an arcing line there, so that arcing line is going to start at the initial side and go up because it is a positive angle, and then end at the terminal side. And there we have our finished angle. The accuracy involved here does not have to be great. It doesn't have to be exactly 215 as long as you get it roughly in the right position on the circle. So let's try number 2 here. Well, we know a couple things about this. First of all, if this is a negative angle, then we're going to go the reverse direction around the circle. So instead of saying this is 270 right here, we are going to say that this is going to be negative 90. Well, how can we say that? We know a quarter turn around a circle is 90 degrees, but now we're going in the opposite direction because we're dealing with negative degrees or negative angles. So negative 40, again, we know where the initial side is going to be. That's always going to be that arrow facing to the right. But where is the terminal side going to be? Well, it's not quite all the way to 90, so it has to be less than 90. Now, I do want to draw out another one, and that is if I draw a line here, what is that one? Well, that's going to be 45, or specifically negative 45 degrees. So where would negative 40 degrees be? Well, it's not even to negative 45 yet. It is just before, but not too much before. So we're going to draw a line that is almost the same, but a little bit less than that 45 degree mark. Now, this is a negative angle. Therefore, it is going in the down direction. So that is what our angle will look like. Notice the curve comes down off the initial side instead of up off the initial side. Now, don't let this concern you. Even though that this is negative 90 and this is 270, you might say, well, how can they both be correct? And the answer is one is going up and one is going in the opposite direction. They are both correct depending on the type of angle that you are using. Now let's go down to the guided practice. Now here's the point in the video that I would like you to pause and try this out for yourself just to see if you already have the hang of it. So I'll let you have that time. Thank you so much. So I know that you are a fantastic student and that you actually paused the video. So let's do these together now. 80 degrees. What can we do with this? Well, I remember from my top circle that this is going to be 90 degrees. So if that is 90 degrees, 80 degrees can't be that far off from it. It's probably just a little bit less than that 90 degree mark. So my initial side is always going to be facing off to the right, and my terminal side is going to be a little bit less than 90. Now, is this going to go up off of my initial side, or is it going to go down? Well, because it's positive, it's going to go up off my initial side, and then it's going to curve all the way to my terminal, and this is my angle. Now, let's try negative 105. Now, I know that I'm going to be going the reverse way down the triangle, so I'm going to start counting in the reverse direction. First thing that I know is that this is going to be negative 90 degrees. And what is the next line here, next quarter of the circle going to be? Well, that's going to be negative 180 degrees. So if we're dealing with negative 105, it has to be somewhere in between here. So how can we figure out the closest possible approximation right now of where negative 105 is? Well, I remember from my circle up here that the angle between 90 and 180 is 135. That means that the angle between negative 90 and negative 180, that is going to be negative 135 degrees, which means that my terminal side is going to be somewhere between the 90 and 135. I would say it's going to be a little bit closer to the 90, so I'm going to draw it roughly right there, and that's my terminal side. Remember, my initial side will always be on this right arrow, and now I need my arc. It is a negative angle, so it will go down off the initial side and then hit my terminal side right there. And that is my negative 105 degree angle.